Anyway, wonderful to see you all. Anyway, where's that Keith Yoakum? I'm going to get him. There he is. I was thinking, I got to kind of hold it together this class because, after all, can't turn into a complete blubbering idiot. And then Keith plays a clip from The Chosen. I'm on my seat. I'm like, you're playing with me, Keith. Anyway, gonna do my best. Amy gave me a few tips on how to, recenter and recalibrate and realign my, energy. I'm not sure if Whitney Houston's quite my jam, but it was a suggestion. So, this morning we're going to be looking at Hezekiah, who admittedly is probably one of the better known kings in the record. His story is so incredible. The time period Hezekiah reigned in was really quite extraordinary. And this goes back to some of the introductory material where the Assyrian was now entering this period of time called the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which was really the zenith of its strength and power and influence. So the Assyrian was once again in the ascendancy and was wreaking havoc in this part of the world and what we now call the Middle East, Mesopotamia, and it extended its power right down into Egypt. So the Assyrian was a powerful foe, and the Assyrians were intent on expansion. They were empire builders, and many would actually trace that lineage right back to the early days after the flood, when Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginnings of this great power. Of course, the Tower of Babel was in that part of the world as well. So this land between the rivers, Mesopotamia, is acknowledged by everyone, both religious and secular, as very much a beginning of history as we know it. So the Assyrian. The title of the class is Bending Not Breaking, and Keith has been walking us through a lot of situations and examples in the Bible about individuals who could have quite easily said it's not fair because of what God brought upon them. And Hezekiah certainly ranks as one of those individuals, someone who God's brought a lot on, really in some respects, kicked all the legs out from underneath Hezekiah. But it was, for a greater good, for a greater purpose. Now, just to touch on something I brought up at the end of last class and kind of had to barrel through it, and then I started crying, so it might not have been articulately expressed. But, one of the things that we see over and over again in the lives of righteous men and women is a willingness to accept responsibility for mistakes made. And Jehoshaphat was one such individual. That's really what, to me, is such a stellar aspect of his character. And Jehoshaphat had a horrible blind spot. He just kept connecting and connecting and connecting with the house of Ahab. And admittedly, when the last class tomorrow is Ahab the wily strategist. We're going to take a close look at Ahab and what happened to him and the interactions he had with God. And it helps explain a little bit why Jehoshaphat may have felt, there was a green light there to reach out and engage Ahab and his family. But when it all came apart and the dire consequences of his choices were made clear to him, Jehoshaphat owned it fully, didn't fight it. And he accepted those. When God said, look, I'm going to impose judgment on you, okay, you're right. I accept it. And he managed to work with it. And in the end, God actually, repented of what he was going to do to Jehoshaphat and afforded them salvation. So that was yesterday. So today we're going to look at Hezekiah He's one of the 4 good kings of Judah, and one of the metrics used in respect to Hezekiah is David. And if we turn to 2 Kings 18, Hezekiah is described in absolutely glowing terms. Beginning in verse 2, he was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time Israelites had been burning incense to it. So, it was called Nehushtan. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands the Lord had given Moses. And the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. Now that is an absolutely phenomenal description of a person could earn from God. And Hezekiah was that man. He trusted. But what we're going to find as we move through Hezekiah's life is that he came to a moment in time where he faltered, and he lost his verve, he lost his commitment to this program that he had enacted in Jerusalem and in the nation. And one of the things that Hezekiah wanted to undo was, well, first of all, everything that his father Ahaz had brought about, but he also wanted to undo this vassalage to the king of Assyria. So again, this speaks to all the different things that were going on in this part of the world. First of all, Hezekiah is bookended by 2 of the worst kings in Israel and Judah's history. You could argue that Ahaz, who came before, Hezekiah's father, and Manasseh, his son, exceeded even the house of Ahab and Jezebel in their exercise of wickedness. These 2 men were profoundly evil and absolutely premeditatedly intent on walking away from God and the law of Moses. These 2 men had no time for it. And, I think one of the great mysteries of the human condition, and we often find ourselves doing this, when we muse upon our pillow at night, is why? Why do some people, set themselves against God? Like, what's the end game? What are you gonna gain? I mean, it's you versus God. Do we need to discuss the inevitable outcome? Is this like, Ohio State and Michigan? Which is becoming increasingly an inevitable outcome, but hey, just kidding. But, we're kind of accustomed to looking at, whatever arena of human activity, sure, some contests might be unequal, but we got 2 groups of humans going to, battle against each other. And we can admittedly okay, well, there's an uncertainty attached to the outcome, but not with God. There's no uncertainty. And these guys knew God. They believed in God. They didn't doubt he existed. Like, what up, brah? What are you doing? But that is, it speaks to the state of the human mind and the human intellect. And interestingly, when humanity very quickly pivoted to false gods, now if you're a student of that, one thing that's quite amusing is how when you create gods, you make sure they're as flawed as you are. When you look at the mythology associated with pagan pantheons, I mean, the gods and goddesses are absolutely horrific. And one thing that seems to come up over and over again is, for some reason, people create gods and goddesses that seem to have an insatiable lust for human blood. It's like, what? But that's what happens. That's where people go. That's where we go. We go and create these alternative deities, which are just these monstrous, horrible creatures of our nightmares. It's like, oh, what's happening? But that's what these men did. And I think in the end, the only conclusion we can draw is the one the Bible draws. And that's, the heart is desperately wicked and deceitful. Who can know it? Who can know it? So in the end, along comes a man like Hezekiah. And, Hezekiah is a fascinating example of, well, is it nature or is it nurture? Like, what is it? I mean, because if you were going to argue nurture, you would have said Hezekiah was, done before he began, that with the influence that must have surrounded Hezekiah's life. He had no choice but to follow in the ways of his father. He did not. He did not. And quite frankly, I find, kind of these endless debates about nature versus nurture are incredibly unhelpful. Incredibly unhelpful. We all have a capacity to make a choice. And we need to exercise that choice. And you know what we also have an obligation to do is inform ourselves. We had a discussion at our ecclesia recently, and one young brother said, well, to be quite honest, with the availability of knowledge on the internet today, I think everyone's responsible. No one has an excuse. You can all find things out. You can inform yourself. I mean, you do all the time when it comes to other endeavors. I mean, you wouldn't walk around volunteering yourself to, do open heart surgery if you were a plumber. You just recognize you didn't have the skill set. Well, maybe you did, but, or, whatever else. I'm not going to volunteer myself. I was talking to Matt Ross. He's a structural engineer. I'm not going to go represent myself as an engineer and say, hey, let's put this building together like this. And, you put that post over there and, throw a few girders, beams. Hey, that looks good. That'd be insanity. And in general, the world recognizes that, being uninformed and unknowledgeable is a reason to bar you from certain activities. And it's inexcusable when we represent ourselves as being knowledgeable when we're not. So there's a general understanding to inform yourself, to get knowledge, to understand. And that never before in human history have we had knowledge more available to us. I mean, we are living in, at least in the first world, we're living in incredibly cushy times. And, so, hey, you don't know something? Oh, my goodness, punch a button on that thing. You can find out lots of stuff. I mean, some of it's not legit, but hey, there's ways of finding that out. So Hezekiah made a choice to inform himself. And one thing he did was set about to undo the damage his father had done. And he immediately instituted wide-ranging reforms. He just thought, right, I'm done. I am going to start by absolutely clearing out the physical representation of these, heinous forms of pagan worship. And as we've discussed before, good king after good king after good king went after these physical representations, which they appropriately and rightly did. The big trick was getting into the minds and hearts of the individuals who were predisposed to those things in the first place. That was one of the challenges they were all confronted with. But Hezekiah, just like Asa and Jehoshaphat, set about to do that. If you turn over to 2 Chronicles 29, one thing that Hezekiah did in order to affect, changes in the way people thought, is once again, he fell back on the Levites. So in 2 Chronicles 29, verse 3, in the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites, assembled them in the square on the east side, and said, listen to me, Levites. Consecrate yourselves now, consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all defilement for the sanctuary. And our parents were unfaithful. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord our God and forsook him. What did Hezekiah do? Oh, my mommy and daddy, they were so bad, and I'm going to be so bad and bad. No, he didn't say that. He didn't throw that up as an excuse for continuing to behave. He said, hey, our parents were no good. We're going to do something different to what they did. And he did. Everything about the temple, Ahaz had shut down. Shut it down. Chased the Levites away. You know what Ahaz did to the temple? He struck a deal with the Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser, in order to, afford himself protection. Ahaz paid protection money to the boss on the block, and he met his new boss up in Damascus, and he saw an altar that everyone seemed to like. He copies the altar, removes the brazen altar, and puts this pagan altar. So he says to Tiglath-Pileser, hey, when you come and visit me, it's going to be all good. You're going to feel right at home. I got this great altar. You love it. We all love it. You can worship there. You can go into the temple and worship. Seriously, what are you thinking? But that's what he was thinking. I'm looking after myself. I'm going to, this guy scares me. Tiglath-Pileser, admittedly, scary dude. God, way scarier. But what did Ahaz do? He worried about the thing he could see, didn't think about what he couldn't see. Although he had given it a thought or two, he would remember what God had done to guys who thought they were scary, like Pharaoh. So, he goes on and, engages the Levites. They go to work. They reestablish these things. And this really speaks to what the law was about. Why bring it all back? Why reinstate? Why get this whole thing, this whole engine of the Levites and the temple and the offerings fired up again? Because this is how the people were taught. These were all object lessons. These were all, things that God intended to get them to think. Sacrifice and the cleansings and the holidays, all of it. What did Paul say? These were, tutors helping his people come to a better place. And Hezekiah recognized the law as a benefit in that respect. They purged the temple, and then they sanctify it, and then Hezekiah sets about to celebrate the Passover. And he can't do it in the first month because nothing's cleansed yet, so he does it in the second month. Nothing stopping Hezekiah from doing what he knows to be right. So in 2 Chronicles 30, he celebrates this amazing Passover, one of the greatest Passovers celebrated in Israel's history. And he invites those who were left up north. Northern kingdom gone now. That's over. Wiped out. And, he puts all of these things back into place in order to it somehow re-engages people, bring them back to God, get them thinking again, get them engaged. Now, this is where, things get a bit interesting. One of Hezekiah's key reforms was the removal of all high places, even those devoted to the God of Israel. And this had always been a little bit of a niggly thing in Israel's history. Very few kings were inclined to remove these local places of worship. These were places where they would go and sacrifice to God, worship Him, quite possibly celebrate the feast days when they were inclined to go down to Jerusalem. So these were local sites of worship. Some were used for idol worship. Those were taken away right away by Hezekiah. But God said, when you come into the land, I'm going to choose a place. I'm choosing a place. You're going to worship me there. And it took a very long time for that to actually happen. We suspect it was the case during the reign of Solomon, which was very well organized. and very well set up, and the temple newly built. But after that, there was a lot of local practices reemerged. But Hezekiah was determined to institute this reform. He had such a powerful attachment and such tremendous trust in God and in his law and in the foundation that Israel had been given at Sinai. So Hezekiah, came at this with such a powerful spirit of commitment. Absolutely amazing to behold. This was a good man. So one thing he also did, and this is where things got a little bit interesting. So he rebels against the Assyrian king. I don't know, what's this equivalent to today? I mean, it would be like, a country like Nicaragua deciding if it was, let's think of a good example. I don't know, think of some little country that is basically under the thumb of its neighbors. Okay, let's say Taiwan. This would be like Taiwan saying to China, we're done with you, we'll never have anything more to do with you. We're absolutely finished. We're sick of your intimidation, sick of your suzerainty over this part of the world. We're going for it. And then, maybe Taiwan would invade North Korea and say, yeah, we're going to take this away from you, and we're big. That was just about what Hezekiah was doing. That was the kind of, international scandal that his move represented when he rebelled against the Assyrian king. And what he did is he invaded the Philistines, who were also vassals of the Assyrian, and reappropriated that territory, which was Israel's by right. That was part of the land that God had given Israel way back when. So, clearly Hezekiah was limited in just how much he could invade, but he took this chunk. And he, just threw the glove down and said, look, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to trust in God, and I'm going to move forward. I'm going to do this thing. And he did it. And for a period of time, Hezekiah was enjoying success. Things were going really well for him. And, of course, this was when he, in preparation for these things, he dug the conduit. Which ranks as, we saw that, the Siloam inscription, ranks as one of the great engineering feats of the ancient world, so that the Gihon Spring would flow into the city instead of down the Kidron Valley. So he stopped it up, he ran it through the city, dug this famous conduit, and already he fortified the cities, and he made all these preparations, physical, spiritual, emotionally. He just had the people just built right up, and he made his move. And Hezekiah must have felt quite confident that in light of everything he had done, he was heading in the right direction, and he was going to have God's blessing. Now, Hezekiah, knew his Bible, and God had said repeatedly, right? You do what I say, and I'll bless you. One will chase 100, 1,000 will chase 10,000. These were all assurances given by God in the law that things would go well if you obey me. Hezekiah was obeying God. So, all this goes on. What happens? Well, Tiglath-Pileser's off the scene now. He's dead. Sennacherib's in charge. Sennacherib's up north. And he's like, what the heck? What is this guy doing? He owes me. His nation voluntarily entered into a treaty agreement with me. This was like diplomacy 101. You have an obligation to me. I don't care what you think, and I sure don't care about your God, and I don't care about your little nubbin of a country. You don't do this to me. So what does a boss like Sennacherib do? You're going to be an example, my friend. You're going to be an example. And that's exactly what happened to Judah. Sennacherib made them an example. He goes in, you look at 2 Kings 18, Sennacherib goes rolling in, and you talk about things disintegrating in a heartbeat. You go to verse 13. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, so Hezekiah had a long period of peace, was going really well. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Gone. And that's exactly what Sennacherib says in his prison. If you remember the first class, Sennacherib's prison, he describes just this, totally corroborates the biblical record. So Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent this message to the king at Lachish. I have done wrong. Withdraw from me, and I will pay you whatever you demand of me. The king of Assyria exacted from Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. So Hezekiah gives him all the silver that was found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace. At this time, Hezekiah, king of Judah, stripped off the gold with which he had covered the doors and the doorposts of the temple of the Lord and gave it to the king of Assyria. This was so bad. You talk about, I don't know, have you invested a ton of time and energy in preparation for something? Have you set out to, accomplish a task, maybe something you've done with your ecclesia or church? And you got these aspirations and goals, and you think, how could anybody, find this activity nothing short of amazing? And for some reason, something comes along and just seems to undo everything. And you're like, this is a good work. Why is this good work? Well, hey, let's face it. Many of us have been engaged in attempts to reunify our community. And we just feel like thwarted, more often than not. And, hey, Jesus, we could use some blessing down here to move this thing forward. It's good. Those are experiences we all have. And we all have experienced, frustration, upset, and sometimes anger and resentment. And sometimes we've dissolved into bitterness, not good, over these efforts not bearing fruit. Well, this is that situation on many steroids. This thing is just epically failing. And it's like the Assyrian walked in, did what he wanted. Just did what he wanted, took what he wanted. He took an enormous number of captives. He had them all pooled, ready to take them away, as the Assyrians do. And they were having their way, absolutely having their way with Hezekiah and Judah. And then, Hezekiah tries to undo it. He tries to pay him off. And, years ago, we had conversations in our ecclesia about Hezekiah. And we had one brother so convinced that Hezekiah would never, ever, ever have stumbled or faltered, that he was convinced that when the Bible said it was Hezekiah, it was actually Hezekiah's men doing it, not Hezekiah himself. I personally think it was Hezekiah. And the reason I do is because this reflects the reality of service in Christ, of being a disciple, being a follower of God. The things we attempt to do, the course we set ourselves on, frequently is beset by such serious challenges that there are instances in our lives where we think, did we make the right decision? Have I done the right thing? Have the choices I made in life borne fruit and benefited people around me? In Hezekiah's case, the choices he made had come and fallen heavily on the nation. Hezekiah was still in Jerusalem, although you can read on the screen, he actually was stricken ill and told he was going to die. So Hezekiah personally wasn't doing well. But, what does a good king do? He looks around at his nation and goes, I've screwed up. This is a disaster. And the people are suffering because of what I've done. They're being slaughtered and taken captive. Lachish, which was being besieged at the time, one of the kind of great Assyrian reliefs, and I mentioned this, didn't have a picture of it, but you can Google it, is the siege of Lachish. Lachish was a powerful fortress, well fortified. And the Assyrians just set their mind. When the Assyrians set his mind to take you, that's why, anybody with a half a brain would, okay, I get it. I'll go. Because otherwise you got flayed alive and skewered and all kinds of other cool things. That's what they did. That's what they were doing to Lachish, and Sennacherib recorded it because it was actually one of his few successes on this campaign. Because as we know, things were going to... God was going to turn the tables. But, everything was not going well. Hezekiah himself, if we turn to 2 Kings 20, was horribly ill. And 2 Kings 20, verse 1, in those days Hezekiah became ill, was at the point of death. Isaiah says, this is what the Lord says, put your house in order because you're going to die. And Hezekiah turns to God, as good men do. I've walked before you faithfully with wholehearted devotion and have done what is good in your eyes. That's, Hezekiah knew what he had done was right, similar to Job. Job knew what he had done was right. He was like, why are you doing this to me? And God responds immediately, go back and tell Hezekiah, the ruler of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says, I've heard your prayer, I've seen your tears, I will heal you. And on the third day from now, you will go to the temple of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you in this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. So on top of the Assyrian absolutely having their way with his country, Hezekiah himself was deathly ill. So, hey, this is the roof opening up and caving in on you. This, ranks amongst those situations that were absolutely epically difficult, similar to Job, similar to Joseph, similar to David on occasion, similar to, many godly men and women who found themselves in desperate straits. And one of the great and amazing things about this period of time is this is the backdrop of the prophecy of Isaiah. You read through Isaiah, and Brother Harry Whitaker did, I think, an amazing job of laying that out. He's got a great exposition of Isaiah, and he goes through it. And Isaiah's prophecies and the things he says and the way he says them are very much set in the context of the Assyrian invasion. The messianic prophecies, the restoration prophecies. This is all brought about by this situation, which was the Assyrian coming in and destroying the land. And in many respects, the Assyrian becomes very much a type or a metaphor or an allegory of all that is in opposition to God. From a human point of view, from an institutional point of view, the Assyrian was everything God isn't. And they represented, the human bestial condition at its worst. That was the Assyrian. And Isaiah, God through Isaiah brought this all to bear on the words that Isaiah shared with us. And one thing that was evident is that when Hezekiah was sick, it appeared he had lost quite a bit of control over those under him. So if you remember the prophecy about Eliakim and Shebna, Shebna was condemned, Eliakim was praised and blessed. So one of the things they were doing was trying to, rush off to Egypt and find help with Egypt. And Isaiah speaks to it. Egypt's a broken reed. If you lean on it, it'll pierce your hand. So all of these things are spiraling out of control. Hezekiah falters and he tries to pay this bully off. But as we just read, Hezekiah does turn to God in prayer. Now, of course, the final insult to injury is the Assyrian sends an army of 180,000. Has anyone been to Jerusalem? And you have a rough idea of the size of the old city, like what Jerusalem historically would have looked like. It's not that big. None of them were. They were citadels, essentially, walled fortresses that people ran to during time of distress. So 180,000 soldiers around Jerusalem, as it would have been in Hezekiah's time, would have been unbelievable. It would have been the most overwhelming, overawing sight a person could have beheld. This was like, I mean, you're talking like Hollywood epic. This was doomsday to the max. It was not good. 180,000. I don't know if any of you guys have heard this news report lately, kind of a latest little archaeological find. You know how they do LiDAR now? They think they found the Assyrian encampment north of Jerusalem. They had a unique oval formation that they think they found, that's where the Assyrians set up its camp. Because, that's what they did. Romans had square camps. Apparently the Assyrians had oval. So look it up. It's absolutely amazing. So we have this character, the Rabshakeh. And the Rabshakeh is Sennacherib's emissary. It's actually a title. And he enters into negotiations with Hezekiah's men. And you might recall how Rabshakeh spoke to them in Hebrew. And he spoke very loudly. Obviously, in those days, you could stand outside the walls, and the surrounding hills actually created kind of a natural amphitheater. So Rabshakeh's there, and the men say, "Oh, could you speak to us in Aramaic, not Hebrew? We understand Aramaic." And what was Rabshakeh's response? "Oh, I'm speaking to everybody in this city, because if they don't do what I tell them, if they don't obey my master, they're going to eat their own dung and drink their own piss. That's what I'm here to tell you." So at this point, the intent of the Assyrian was to completely dismantle the kingdom of Judah and do to it what they had earlier done to Israel. This, in their minds, this was over. They were all gone. And this was going to be the end of Judah as anyone knew it. So, God had certainly appointed the Assyrian. It says so in Isaiah. Assyria is my hammer. Hey, Hezekiah was doing his best, but there was a degree of corruption and idolatrous inclination that had settled into the people that was never going to go away. And that became evident when Manasseh came to the throne. As much as Hezekiah was trying to reform the nation, there was some embedded corruption that he was not going to get out. So, God said through Isaiah, "Look, I got issues with my people, and I am going to judge them. And they don't, make good decisions." And, he had reached out to Ahaz, who had repudiated God's offer to show him a sign, which then led on to the prophecy of a virgin shall conceive. So, in some respects, the Assyrians seem to be aware of it. Rabshakeh says, "Oh, your God sent me. Your God sent me here to do this." And, can you imagine listening to that and being aware of what Isaiah said and yeah, you're kind of right. God did send you. We were hoping, our repentance would have, spared us these consequences. But Rabshakeh knew it. You know what else he knew? Hezekiah had taken away the high places. And he said, "Oh, isn't this Hezekiah the one who removed God's high places? Why would God support him? That was stupid, Hezekiah. To diminish the number of places you'd worship your God. That's not how it works, Hezekiah. I mean, look at the nations around you. What do? They just, everywhere you turn, there's a shrine, there's a high place, there's an Asherah pole. It's how we worship our gods and goddesses. We make sure there's tons of stuff. You took it all away, Hezekiah. You're not a good king at all. In fact, no wonder God's so angry at you. You're quite stupid and dumb." And then, as we know, Rabshakeh went too far. He goes, "Not only did God ask me to come and do this, but I'm not sure your God can save you even if he wanted to. Because what have I done to all the other nations?" And there's a lot of scripture we could read, and we're obviously not reading it, and I'm recounting. You're going to have to trust me, but you can read the verses I got there. Rabshakeh said and he lists a whole bunch of nations that the Assyrian had conquered and defeated. And he said, their gods, he lists the gods. He goes, their gods couldn't save them. What makes you think your God will? Buddy, quit while you're not ahead. But he didn't. Now, one of the suggestions that has been made about the Rabshakeh, he was actually Jewish. And he was part of the captivity from Israel that had been taken away. And we know historically that Jewish captives, as Jews always have done, found a way to succeed wherever they went. I mean, Daniel and his 3 friends were highly respected by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians for their wisdom. So it's not a stretch to think that this Rabshakeh was himself a Jew who had done well in the Assyrian court and was now a representative to the land. And one of the things that back it up is, one, he knew Hebrew, and 2, he was intimately familiar with the local politics, what was going on. I mean, what would it really matter to the Assyrian king what Hezekiah did other than, rebel against him? But Rabshakeh, he took the knife and he knew which ribs to slide it into. He was very familiar with the backstory and the circumstances. And it was for this reason that God said, right. Now, having said that, God has a time frame and a plan. It was not time yet to take the nation of Judah away and destroy his temple. That was something that wasn't going to happen at this point in time. God was going to use this situation as to display to the world the fact that, you know what, I put up with a lot of things, but when you question my potency, my position as the only God, then I'm going to make a statement. And one thing, the one powerful theme that runs through the book of Isaiah, which is, as I said, set in this context, is God's supremacy and the fact that he's the only God. And there's some, particularly in the latter half of Isaiah, some powerful scriptures describing the futility of false worship. How absolutely ludicrous it is at the physical level, where you carve something out of wood or make it out of metal. But then at the spiritual level, the impotency of these gods and goddesses that you've created for yourself, their ineffectualness. So this situation, and it was facilitated by Assyrian arrogance, and it says in Isaiah, the Assyrian might have gotten away with this if they had humbled themselves and respected my role. They didn't. So as we know, the angel comes in the middle of the night, and these 180,000 soldiers the next morning are all dead. And God saves the nation. And in all likelihood, based on some of Isaiah's comments, these captives that Sennacherib describes as having taken were returned. And the nation enjoys a period of prosperity. Hezekiah's life is extended, and basically what we have here is this powerful imagery that speaks of what we look forward to, and that is the return of Christ and the cleansing and rejuvenation of this planet. So at the human level, the lessons I've always found very compelling in Hezekiah's life is, as we've been discussing, the fact that as we, move through life, as we engage in service, as we, seek to do what is good and right in our lives, and provide, whatever it might be for our families and our brothers and sisters and our faith, spiritual communities, when, there are no guarantees that those things will necessarily go in the direction we'd like them to. And in Hezekiah's case, despite all the good that he did, and he said to God, look, I've done good. Please help me. And God said, you're right. You did do good. Hezekiah, you're an amazing guy. But there's a bigger thing at stake here. And it wasn't that Hezekiah personally needed to have a reform. This wasn't a reform moment for Hezekiah in that sense. He was a godly man. He stayed the course. Like the title says, he bended, but he didn't break. He rethought the things that he had done. And fair enough. I mean, that was a very human reaction to circumstances absolutely falling apart around him. But he stayed close to God. He did not walk away. And that's over and over again. You look at the lives of men and women in the Bible and the lives of those around us. Faithful people, we don't know. We're doing the best we can with the circumstances that God's provided us. It's okay if we don't know, and as a result, we make missteps or mistakes. God doesn't expect us to. That's not something He's given us. He hasn't, someone once said, Bible prophecy is given to help us understand God is active in the world today, not to turn us into prophets, not to turn us into, foretellers or, like we got special powers. We don't. They did in the first century for a brief period of time. In the meantime, we got to work hard. That's all. And recognize that not everything might necessarily work out or go our way. But what God's looking for through it all is steadfast obedience and attachment to Him. And you look at these examples: David, Job, Jonah, Peter. Keith's been doing an amazing job of drawing our attention to these individuals who could quite easily have said it's not fair. They don't say that. They stay attached. That's all we got. Okay. Not bad. Not bad. They stay attached. And that's, in the end, when you think about it, what does it say in Corinthians? When the judgment comes, some of us have built houses of straw, some houses of stone and gold and silver. Some will withstand the, fires of judgment, some won't. And we're like, well, what does that mean? Well, things that we may have engaged in might not withstand the test of time. That's okay. That's okay. But what does need to withstand the test of time and the circumstances that we might find ourselves in life is ourselves. We're the edifice. We're the building. We're the building God wants. Sorry. And that's, a pretty amazing thought, that what God's really interested in is us. Thanks.